Welcome to Adjusted Reality, a podcast series trusted by the adjusted and brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress, where we learn from athletes, celebrities, influencers, and healthcare professionals about how to optimize health in a fun, relatable way. Join me, Dr. Sherry McAllister, as I speak with former professional Olympic athlete Greg Bennett about his mental and physical training as a professional triathlon athlete. Greg Bennett raced professionally for 27 years with just over 500 professional races and 100 plus wins. He's qualified for several Olympics, won 2 World Series titles, and 3 U.S. Grand Slams and World Championships. During that time, he earned his degree in sports marketing and a diploma in business and computer programming. After retiring from the sport, he started a podcast called The Greg Bennett Show and is also the founding chief of staff for AnyQuestion, a platform where consumers can get the insights and perspectives they're looking for from world-class experts at the top of their field. Welcome to the show, Greg. I'm so excited to have you.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I feel old, actually, when I listen to that. But it's such an honor to be on the show. So thank you for having me.
There's not very many people that can say they spent 27 years in any sport or even in today's world in a career choice. So we're very, very grateful that you have this experience because we're going to tap into it today on Adjusted Reality. And the first couple of things that I want to kick it off with is, now that you're in this, what I would consider, some would say retired, some would say a next journey of life, how does it feel? Because it was so intense during those 27 years, I'm sure, on the training, the discipline, everything had to be in its place to be at the top of your game. And triathlon is not, by any stretch of the imagination, an easy sport to really embrace because there's 3 sports in one to be doing constantly. So can you give us a little feedback on, now that you're at this new chapter, what are some of the things that you feel mentally, physically, and emotionally after being out of the serious stress into a whole new chapter?
Well, I think chapters is the way to put it. I think, chapter 1 of my life was definitely the focus on being the greatest athlete I thought I could be. And I didn't love that quote at the time when I was an athlete, like being the best I could be. I always felt like that was a bit of a cop-out. For me, it was to be the very best in the world. And I was very driven. I was very passionate. I was very determined. And I came with a lot of discipline. And so for me, the sport of triathlon was a great avenue to try and be the greatest in the world at something, because it was a sport that required, to your words, the physical, emotional, and mental aptitude to try and be the greatest in all of those 3 areas. But I learned a lot, honestly, in that career. In the 90s, I'm aging myself, but in the 90s, I used to, I believed I was the hardest worker in the world. And I believed that that's all it took. Sheer hard work. Whoever worked the hardest was the best. And I took that so far. I was, urinating blood often. I was unhealthy. I was very unhealthy. But I wore that almost like a badge of honor, that if I'm urinating blood, what's, how's anybody going to take me on? That's how hard I am. And it was that mentality, right? It was all about being harder and tougher. And look, I did get some success along, those years, but it really was in about after the 2004 Olympic Games. And I had won the World Series a couple of times, even with that kind of an attitude. But it really was from about 2004 onwards where there was a massive change, where my wife, who had been world number 1 in the sport of triathlon and represented the US at the 2004 and 2008 Olympics, we sat down and we thought, there's got to be a better way, than just this brutal hard work. We got to do things better. And this is where we did things like we really focused on our team. And it's so wonderful that I'm speaking to chiropractors right now, because I can honestly tell you, and this is not just trying to make you all feel good about who you are, But for Laura and I, the best thing we did was we brought Dr. Alex Keith in our team, and he's down in West Palm Beach here, and he's now Jimmy Buffett's right hand guy, and travels with Jimmy and his team. But Alex Keith became our number one bodywork specialist. Then he also brought in a year or two later Dr. Ted Forkham, who's out in Portland, Oregon, and is just amazing especially when it comes to feet and biomechanics. So he became our guy that we would often go and fly and stay with. Then we built our massage therapists around that. And then we started focusing on things like sleep and nutrition and general health and the mental side, as what you mentioned earlier. And we started focusing on those to try and be better than anybody else on those things. And word around town in Boulder, Colorado was like, you don't call the Bennetts after 8, right? Because we took sleep seriously. It wasn't an hour, that'd be nice to. No, we were in bed, asleep by 8:15 every single night. And we were up and getting going by 4:35 every single day. And that was just our routine. I'm not saying people have to have that same kind of routine, but that worked for us. But we took sleep very, very seriously. And then we added in all the bodywork specialty, and we added in the nutrition, and we just tried to dial everything in more and more. And by 2006, I'd had a winning rate of about 8% prior to 2006. By 2006, I changed my winning rate to closer to 50%. So 1 in 2 races I was winning on the world stage. And became the world's highest money earner and won the Grand Slam many times over. And a lot of that was just simply because I built this amazing team around me. And they weren't just the best at what they do. I'm not talking about they were just the best people at adjusting me or teaching me Graston or whatever it was in terms of myofascial release or whatever we were working on. But these people wanted the very best for me. And this relationship where we were a team fully invested together, that was the biggest difference. I'd turn up to a race and I wasn't racing just for myself. You know, I remember turning up to one final race, and it was Dallas 2007. And if I won this final race of the series, you know, it was a $500,000 payday. It was a big deal. And Dr. Alex Keith had flown up, and at 2 a.m. in the morning, he was up working on my body. I'd had a bit of an Achilles injury. I had to win this 5th race of 5. And it was like he'd given up his family time to come and be with me. And I remember thinking, I owe it to him. I owe it to my team to perform. And that was really unique at the time for a triathlete to have such a strong team. I think there's a lot of triathletes now that have do a better job of having teams. But that was, you know, I'm getting a little sidetracked here, but I just wanted to give you a bit of I almost within my triathlon career had 2 chapters in itself, where I had the hard work is everything. And then the second chapter became, marginal gains. Where can we do little things better than everybody else? And the importance of relationships and team. Then transitioning out of sport, I'm not going to say it was easy. There was a couple of years there where, I think I'd been so focused on something for so long, for 27 years, that sure, I was ready to retire. I remember my final race was almost like a Forrest Gump moment. If you've seen the movie Forrest Gump, where he's running across America and he's like, I think I'm done now. I had that real moment in a race in Beijing, China, actually. I just remember being on the bike and be like, the bucket's empty, I'm done. And that was it. So I had that real moment. But there was almost like this, for 27 years, I'd been getting all of my cocktail of hormones, the emotions, dopamine, endorphins, and serotonin and oxytocin. I was getting so much of that from the sport of triathlon that then I felt a bit empty for a while. And I tried to find value in becoming a coach and trying a few other things. Then I started a podcast. And having the podcast was almost a really just great step in moving myself out of Greg Bennett, the athlete, to Greg Bennett, now the podcast host, interviewing other athletes and coaches and doctors and sports scientists and that kind of thing. And I think that was a great next step. But then when it was during that podcast, I had a guy by the name of Ed Baker reach out to me. And Ed Baker's background was really quite something. He'd built several companies. He built one company called friend.ly. And he built it to about 25 million users in 12 months with no paid marketing. And Mark Zuckerberg saw that and said, right, I'm buying your company and I'm bringing you on as the head of international growth for Facebook. And so Ed took that job on at Facebook until they went public and hit 1 billion monthly active users, which is still just mind-boggling to me. And then he was given the opportunity to go work for a little limousine company that would be, it was an app. That app was known as Uber Cabs, and Ed was one of the first people to join Uber way back. And so he spent then 4 years to become the head of growth at Uber and Uber product. And product. But it was, Ed had left Silicon Valley and found the sport of triathlon and was listening to my show. And he started supporting the show. We became good friends. I was helping him with his triathlon journey. And then one day he said to me, Greg, you get to ask all these incredible people questions. Why can't the rest of us? Why can't I have access to a Jan Frodeno, the greatest triathlete of all time? Or why can't I have access to these coaches and sports scientists? How come you get to ask all the questions? And so he came up with this idea of this platform called AnyQuestion. And AnyQuestion, as to your intro, is a place where you can ask questions to all these world-leading thought leaders and experts, and get video responses. And so we started off heavily in endurance sports because that was my background. We brought on strength trainers, brought in nutrition, and then we have a musculoskeletal channel. So for all of your listeners, we'd love to have you on board. So someone like Dr. Ted Forkham, who I believe you know as well, good friend of mine, he's actually helped us build the musculoskeletal. Now, we didn't call it chiropractic. We may call it chiropractic in the future because at the moment there are some PTs and physiotherapists, and I know there's different groups and it's different. It's a different practice, but at the moment they're kind of in the same channel. And you can go on there and ask them questions. To your audience, we'd just love to have you be on there and answering questions. So please let us know. But we have about 25 channels now, about almost 1,000 different experts with almost 50,000 answers of just these incredible people sharing their stories and their knowledge. And, our team is growing. And it's been a really fun, to your point, second chapter. And I'm loving it.
Excellent. That's really one of the big keys is finding passion. And you found it in your early days starting to compete. But let's just take you back, because oftentimes we learn from the past, we bring it into our present, and then we can build a very special future, which clearly you, Greg, have done with your lovely wife, Laura. But let's go back into the motivation. So here you are, probably as a youngster. Did you like the bike first? Was it running? What brought you into the sport of triathlon? And did you dream from the very beginning as a little boy, hey, I'm going to be an Olympian? How did that all work?
Oh, that's really rewinding the clock. But I grew up in a very sports mad family with my brothers. My older brother actually played professional rugby for a while, and I always wanted to do that kind of sport, soccer or rugby at the highest level. But I never grew, to be honest. And then I found the sport of triathlon by accident with a couple of friends, just in a relay event, which a lot of people start with. And look, honestly, if I think about why I got into it, it's probably because it became the ultimate place for me to overcome my teenage insecurities. It was a place where, I don't know if you were like this, but a lot of people, when they go through the teenage years, it's kind of you're just trying to figure out who you are and where do you fit in, and your insecurities are everywhere. And the sport of triathlon, I was embraced very quickly. We had a great triathlon club in Sydney, and I was reasonably good at it. I picked up the swim reasonably quickly. I could run pretty well. I wasn't the greatest runner in the world, but I could run pretty well. And as I grew, the bike became stronger. But I think it was a place where I felt recognized. I felt valued. I felt like I was somebody. And it became, to some degree, my church. It was a place where I felt like I was accepted for who I am. And that's honestly how it started. It wasn't one day I'm going to be the greatest in the world when I first started. But if you ask my wife, Laura, I do often visualize. I'm a very passionate, emotional person. And I do think big, and I do believe great things will happen. And so that, a couple of years into the sport, I started to think, yeah, I want to see if I can change this up and really become one of the greatest ever to do the sport. And I think I got to become world number one for a little bit, but I often say you just borrow it for a moment in time. You're never the greatest. You just sort of, you have a snapshot, you rent being the best in the world just for a moment. But when I first started, honestly, it was about just feeling valued and recognized.
In a world like today, where so many of our teens have been thrown off the regular routine in the last 2 years with the pandemic and trying to help them back on track, I really liked what you said, because finding your place and then building on some of the things that you may feel insecure about in today's world, especially when social media became more and more influenced into their lives. Like, I think you and I really didn't have that upbringing of being able to see so much input and so much distortion of your own self-worth and what you're comparing yourself to. So I really like our listeners to hear our audience being built of patience and career-minded individuals that are really looking for a way to improve their health. There was another piece that I thought was very important, that just as an Olympic athlete, you had the ability to build a team to support your health. And I would love to see every audience listener today contemplate what their team looks like, because you do not need to be an Olympic athlete, although we're very grateful Greg is sharing his Olympic experience. But
I have a story on that. I have a story on that.
Please share your story, Greg. Share it with us.
This is a good one, because often on my show, I do talk about the importance of team and building relationships, and you can't go through life on your own. And my dad passed away in 2019. And my mum had been listening to the show, and she said, you know what, I'm going to build my team, and she now talks to a lot of widowers and about building their team. And so what she did was she invited her veterinarian over, her minister from church, her physical trainer she had. Anyway, there was a whole bunch. I think she had 12 different people. And she invited them all over for a dinner at her house. And she's a great entertainer, and she cooked a wonderful meal and brought them all over. And I'd sort of given her some instructions. And I said, one thing, Mum, that people love to hear is that they're a part of your team. They will go the extra mile if you tell them that they're a part of your team. And so she got up and gave a toast and thanked them all for coming and said, you guys are my team. And I need you now more than ever. I'm a widow after being married for 52 years. It's kind of like, I need you now as my team. And do you all agree to be a part of my team? And they were all obviously, yes, they were there enjoying a great dinner. And she transitioned, which is a very tough chapter in anybody's life, to lose their partner after such a long time. But because of the way she just took it by the reins, she really built her team and did it with intent. I'm so proud of the way that she's been able to do that transition, and focus on having a wonderful team around her. And obviously she's got her sons and everybody else involved, her family, but to have that team, the fact that she got that idea from listening to my show and the importance of team, I was really chuffed about. So yes, everybody listening, the importance of team is not lost on Olympic athletes. It really is good for everybody.
It's fantastic, because you're right, especially as you're going through this grieving period of 52 years with someone, that's the second part of you, right? That's the other half of you. And I love that your mom listens to your podcast. I think that's pretty special in and of itself. So it's always
nice to know I have one listener, right?
That's right. We give a shout out to your mom. Okay. So share this podcast, because I think she'll get a smile on her face. And speaking of smiles, let's go back to you and Laura did you meet Laura when you were training for triathlons? Is that how this couple relationship power team came together?
Yeah, we had met, I think, briefly once or twice in the tour in the late 90s. But in 2000, I was invited by a good friend of mine, Simon Whitfield, to go train with him in Victoria, Canada, to get ready for the 2000 Olympic Games. And I was in a pretty bad place after I was number 2 in the world leading into the Sydney Olympics. But that's a whole nother topic we don't need to go into. But I wasn't in a happy place. I was left off the Australian Olympic team, ended up being a court battle and all sorts of things. And it was just an ugly time. And I was trying to decide, am I going to retire? Do I keep going with the sport? And then Simon, who has been a longtime friend of mine, his dad's Australian and his mum's Canadian. So he's a dual citizen, but he decided to race for Canada. And he said, Greg, you've been left off the team. I could really have you, if you could come be my training partner, I'd love you to come to Canada, Victoria. And I said, why not? So I went to Canada. Simon and I were training really well together. He was kind of a young kid, and I wasn't much older when I think about it. I was only 3.5 years older than him. I think I was 28, 29, but I'd had my moment already kind of on the world stage doing reasonably well. And he was a 24, 25-year-old just trying to find his way in the sport, but he's very, very talented. And so we were training very well together. And during that camp of me living in Victoria, Canada, the Canadian team saw what was happening and thought, well, hang on, if we can find a woman for one of our Canadian female athletes to train with, we should do that. And they brought up Laura Reback. And Laura came up, and I remember saying to myself only a couple of days before she got there, look, I'm off having girlfriends. I'm going to start focusing on myself and reboot. I need to just focus on me, the athlete. And then I turned up to the 50-meter pool at Commonwealth Pool in Victoria, Canada there, and I looked down the other end and I'm like, who's that girl? And that was it. We really, I don't give relationship advice because I was one of those very, very fortunate people that just fell in love immediately. And it really was love at first sight. We basically were living together within a couple of months, and we were just have never left each other. Now we've been together 22 years, and I still can't believe she's with me. I'm incredibly grateful every single day, honestly. She's a remarkable human being. She was a great athlete, but she's an even better mum to our kids. And so, we found each other and did the sport together from 2000 till we both retired same day in 2016.
Wow, you both retired on the same day. Because I was thinking back to that. I think it was a gift that you had that moment in Beijing where you just realized there's nothing left. Because if you leave something in the tank, you always question, could I have done just one more? Like I look back at some of the great hockey players. So I was thinking about, since I am Canadian, and one of the rival teams, we have had some great athletes on our show, but Wayne Gretzky, hard to match a hockey player of such talent and their retiring process and what it looked like. And I think when and the greatest gift you can have is, did Laura have the same moment where she knew, or did she have to have that kind of struggle back and forth?
I think she probably knew about 2 or 3 years earlier. And I think the reason she kept going was because I was still so, intentional about what I was doing. And I was still very involved and wanted to see if I had anything left to give. I noticed the last major race I won, I was 42, and that was the Chicago triathlon, which was kind of a big deal back in the day. And but by 43, 44, that's when I just noticed that my running speed was falling off. And I never wanted to be the athlete that was embarrassing himself. If I couldn't be vying for the win, placing 4th, 5th, 6th didn't interest me. And I knew that would be the time. And it got to the point, like somebody even put out, I think it was Triathlete magazine this last week, said athletes we'd love to see make a comeback. And my name was in there, which I thought was hilarious, as I've put on about 25 pounds since I was racing. And I thought about it and what my response should be. And I haven't responded, but I thought I don't ever want to put my body through what I did to it. Don't get me wrong. I was healthy. I was surrounded by good people, as we've already talked about, but it was still very unhealthy. What I did to my body and the amount of pounding and what it took and the mental anguish and the emotional stress, and just it was a lot. It was a lot. I have some talent, but I wasn't the most talented person in the world. And I really felt like when I say I retired on my own terms, I couldn't have given anything more to the sport than what I'd done. There was a couple of events I look back and go, if I'd raced that differently or done that differently, sure. I kind of go, that I was a bit bummed I didn't win that, but at the same time, I look at it, I couldn't have given anything more to my sport. I couldn't have done anything more. I would never want to ask my body that again.
Sure. Because you know the impact that it had. And fundamentally,
yeah.
I think it's a proud moment where you could step back and say, I truly gave it all. And in everybody's life, I hope they can reflect on when they know they're only giving half of themselves, that they need to reflect on that, because it's why are you only giving half? Is it a fear? Yeah. Is it you're not passionate about it? What is it that's coming into it? And your health really depends on it. And you talked about in your former training days that you started to work smarter with pieces like meditation and visualization, also with chiropractic. Can you kind of expand on what did you start with and how did they impact certain areas of your life?
What did I start with? Can you expand?
Like the meditation.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I think, for me, visualizing, I almost rather call it feelalizing, if that's a word, because for me, visual is somebody that can clearly see it in their head. And I'm not somebody that actually sees it, but I feel it. And that always came very easily. I was a dreamer, a daydreamer to some degree of wanting to be great. It's something I still do. I still dream and want to do something exceptional. I even with the company we're building now at AnyQuestion, it's like I allow myself to dream very, very big. And I enjoy that. And so I naturally have always done that. So when it came to visualizing, I became a little bit more systematic about it, in the sense that there'd be two ways I would visualize. One would be more of a physical visualizing, and the other one would be, just stationary. And the physical would be something like I'd be driving down to the running track, it'd be just a dirt trail or something, and I'd be doing 10 by 3 minutes hard with 1 minute 30 recovery or some workout like that. And on the drive down, I'll be deciding what race is it, who's in the race, what's the weather and the temperature like, how hard's the swim and bike been before getting to the run, and I'd lay out what the race is. And then in warm up, I'd see how my legs feel, and that would often determine, okay, the bike's been really hard, or the bike hasn't been too bad if I feel like my legs are good. And then I would just have a commentator in my head, and often Phil Liggett. I don't know if you know Phil Liggett from the Tour de France, but he's a good friend of mine too. But his voice would be going, helicopters would be above, the national anthem would have been playing, and then I would be visualizing every aspect from it, from where I am off the bike, the crowds, the temperature, like I said, the smell. And between each interval, I'd run the interval as hard as I could. And then the next sort of 90 seconds in my recovery, I'd be planning out the next 3-minute effort. And how's that going to look? Okay, Greg Bennett's going to be, charging up the front here, and it's a close battle. And then I'd go through all the way through, and I'd do my 10 intervals, and I'd finish, with myself winning. That was always important. And that was a very physical way of doing it. And I would even do it when I train with Laura sometimes. I'd run next to her and I'd commentate during her workouts. And so I would be, because she wasn't naturally comfortable at visualizing. And so I would often just do the visual for her. And the other one would be, I spend the time on the massage table. So we would get massage or some form of body work 5 to 6 days a week, and that every afternoon. And that would be my time. And I remember our massage therapist, Marcus Mejias from Venezuela, one of the best. Big shout out to Marcus, one of the best people you could ever meet in Boulder. And he'd be massaging me. He'd be like, okay, Greg, where are you in the race right now? Because you could feel it in my body as I was, going through the race in a stationary form of visualizing. And I do visualizing there. I do a visualize, the night before a race. And I'd allow myself to go through the entire process of a race, from waking up in the morning, setting up transition, warm-ups, the gung-go, the whole thing. I'd allow myself to do that once, and then I wouldn't allow myself to think about the race again. And that became a very disciplined way of visualizing the night before a race. And so I spent a lot of time doing that. And I spent a lot of time planning out what my word affirmations were going to be at certain points of the race. It might be, if it's a pontoon start on the swim, it's like the first word, explode. explode off the start line. So I just yell in my head as that gun would go off, explode. And then it'd be swimming, and then it'd be like power, whatever it took, or, cadence, anything that would get me going. And then once I'm settled in and in a good position in the swim, it'd be like, okay, rhythm, relax, breathe, different kinds of words. And the same on the bike. I'd have different parts where it'd be different words. And I'd map out all those affirmation words the entire time throughout the race. So look, I got very, very good at visualizing, and very comfortable with it. And I loved the game. And when I had Dr. Tommy Wood on my show, and he's somebody that you really should have on your show. He's just a remarkable man. I've had him 4 or 5 times on my show. And Tommy's background, just quickly, he's undergraduate at Cambridge University. He then did his medical degree at Oxford University. Then he's done his did his PhD in physiology and neuroscience at Oslo. And just brilliant, man. He's also in the world's strongest man competition. So he's got this real range of things. Anyway, I remember we had these long conversations about the power of visualizing. And he said to me, Greg, what you think has a direct impact on your physiology, right? And both positive and negative, right? So we can all get doubt, and we can all go in this spiral of doubt, or we can all go in this spiral of fear, or you can go through this empowerment and you can get yourself up and feel good. And it's more, firstly, it's just awareness. Start with awareness of what are you thinking, in any moment. And I'm not perfect by any means, trust me, but it's understanding, what am I thinking right now? Because if you think about it in its most basic terms, what I'm thinking is affecting myself at a hormonal level. And if I'm getting affected hormonally, I'm getting affected physically. And so that's where I always felt like I was always getting the extra workouts on everybody else, because I'd be constantly visualizing in a very intentional manner. And I felt like I was getting a lot more out of my workouts because of my ability to visualize.
It's, I think through what you say, because when you think about taking yourself out of a race, and even we've had many veterans come on Adjusted Reality, a race or a field where they have to be performing at their peak because their life depends on it. There's a couple of things that you say that really transcend both universes of importance. It's being able to have these really important moments where you can say to yourself, power, explode, relax, breathe. And when you hit these stress zones, you're doing something that you're stretching. And I like to say, everybody needs to stretch as much as they can, do things they haven't done, just to feel the exhilaration of it. And it goes with food too, because I love food. So you taste a lot, but eat a little, be able to explore different types of things in your life, because it really does balance your mental and your physical. So I appreciate with what you're saying, how important it is fundamentally to be able to visualize and start with being aware, because sometimes we do completely forget, you know what, I'm stressed out. I'm not even breathing. I'm taking these shallow, really unfortunate breaths. My shoulders are around my ears. I'm hunched over. I'm not in a place where I can actually even feel good, let alone think well. And if we start at that spot, it really does create a stepping stone to get to the next level, then the next level, and the next level. And when you started to do the visualization, did you dive into meditation? Were you able to sit peacefully, clear your mind? Because I know a lot of athletes will tell me there's no way. The first thing I do when I sit by myself is I think about training. So tell me, how did it work for you on the meditation part?
Yeah, I think for me, the meditation part was actually, I was far more of an active meditation type. I wasn't a sit person. If you say, what was my ultimate meditation? It's going through a long run through a forest on my own, on a cold sort of morning, where the air's a little crisp and you can see you're breathing. And you're when you get very, very fit, which I am not these days, but the ability to run in a tempo where you can almost feel it's like the perfect dance, when everything is in absolute rhythm, the breathing, where your foot lands, your arm swing. And you can almost feel your brain tapping on the top of your skull, because it just, the way that everything's just moving in absolute synchrony. It's just, for me, that ultimate dance is a heightened sort of meditation, where people talk about, when they're driving and 2 hours go by and they're like, oh, I didn't even realize I've been driving, they've gone on a long car trip and they didn't realize it. For me, that's how running could be. The way I would be like, oh, wow, 40 minutes have gone by and I've been running in this forest. And it's just, I haven't even thought. And it hasn't been thoughts going on. It's just been very clear, and I'm just in this place. And so for me, meditation only truly worked on that kind of, when I just find absolute rhythm, I'm on my own and I'm not thinking about anything. That's probably, if you ask me to, sit cross-legged and meditate, it doesn't come easy.
I'm glad you said that, because it really, my sister is a yogini, and I try so hard, Greg. No. I try really hard.
You know what I have done recently, though? I'll give you what I am doing now. I do my sauna sessions and an ice bath most mornings, and I have found when I'm sitting in the sauna and I just practice gratitude, right, every single day now. This is my new kind of visualizing, is more of approaching it with gratitude, and for some people that could be prayer and giving thanks, however you want to call it. But sitting down and committing to gratitude every single morning, which takes 10 to 15 minutes to run through everything I'm grateful for, and that can be as basic as running water and a roof on my head, to the team that I'm working with at AnyQuestion and what we're building, and doing that gratitude. And then I always finish with that today could be my last day, so embrace it. Right, that's always my sign off. It's like, today could be your last, or it could be the last of the friends and family around you. You just never know, right? And so I finish with that every single day. And so it's not meditation, but it's the way that I start every day in a really fantastic arousal state, where I feel excited about the day. It's amazing how I get rid of any kind of fear or doubt or sadness or depression or any of those other titles that we want to put to it. I just come out and I'm like, okay, I'm in a good place. Things aren't perfect, but I'm grateful for the things that I do have. And that's it's been very impactful. I've been doing that for about 5 years now. And that's almost been the better medicine for me since I stopped doing those long runs in a forest. Sure. Is just transitioning to sitting still and practicing gratitude.
I like the ability for someone to sit and really contemplate where they're at, because if you don't really put yourself in the present and see where you have come from, it's very difficult to see where you're going. You kind of get a clouded journey of mismatching, and memories come in, and some will be positive and some will be negative. And when you start with a very positive way of looking at what you're grateful for, it elevates your hormones. It creates a level of opportunity for that day, where you wake up and you're grumpy and you kick the dog and your coffee tastes horrible. It's not a good way to begin. No. And really, each day is a blessing if you choose it to be, and your body is the temple. And going back to that temple, Greg, one of the things that you had mentioned when building your team, how did you come into, for example, chiropractic as a discipline? Because many of the listeners right now, they may never have had a chiropractic experience, and some have had some misfortune of, they heard a bad story and it became, oh, well, I'm not going to try that because this happened to my friend. What brought you into like the chiro experience for your training?
I think I dabbled in some chiropractic work in the 90s. And when I say dabbled, I think, again, if I was in some kind of acute pain and I might have gone and seen a chiropractor and then sort of moved on. But it was really in 2004, my wife and I got married at the end of 2004, and we came down to Florida here. And we were looking for somebody to do some body work on us as we decided to rebuild our training and get going. And it was actually my wife's brother, who lives down here permanently, said, oh yeah, there's a guy that puts on a race road here, and I believe he's a chiropractor. It was very, it wasn't anything. And but I think he wants to work with you too and work with athletes, so why don't you give him a shout? It was very like that. And then we decided to meet him, Dr. Alex Keith. I'd been dealing with plantar fascia for years. like years and years. Like every time I get off the bike and run, my foot would be just in agony, and maybe by 5-6K it's loosening up. But I would run in severe pain, with the arch of my foot felt like it was going to explode. And so anyway, we went and met with Alex, and within a couple of months, he'd used his Graston tools and scraped through my foot. There was a lot more soft tissue than just adjusting. People, it's like everybody thinks chiropractic, they're just going to adjust. And it's like, don't get me wrong, he's one of those chiropractors that has very big hands, and I feel very comfortable in adjustments. And I know some people in their neck or whatever it is, I've always felt comfortable with Alex working my entire body. But he also trained us to look after our bodies ourselves, and how to scrape and work on the myofascial system, whether ART or Graston or whatever you're into to working the body. And he became a very good friend. And he treated us for years. We were fortunate to get him onto several US Olympic teams, which he was grateful for, which we always felt like was, of course, right.
Right.
We didn't like sharing him with the rest of the US team. Don't get me wrong. I was on Australian teams, but we were still like, he's our guy. But the rest of the US triathlon team got to work with Alex, and that was great. And then after that, like I mentioned earlier, he's taken a role with Jimmy Buffett. But I think, having Alex number one on our team, then Alex introduced us to Ted Forkham out in Portland. And I remember I can't remember the thing I had going on, whatever it was. Alex said, look, I think there's, a guy you need to meet in Portland. And so I jumped on the phone with Ted, and he said, Greg, come out here, stay with me, just stay with me. I was like, well, we've never met, mate. I'm not going to crash at your house. But he said no, and he just literally opened his home to me. I flew out there and spent, I don't know if it was like 3 or 5 days with him, whatever it was, and he worked on me throughout the week in between patients. And I can honestly say Ted is one of our very closest friends too, right? And he's a quirky guy, and he's a lot of, I really, really enjoyed Ted. And so between Alex and Ted, and then, going back to Australia for 3 to 5 months each year, built our team down there. And we looked for bodywork specialists, not just massage therapists and getting a rub. I wanted people that, could do the myofascial release, or, the dry needling, even as we need it, for some of that deeper work, which I found quite useful, especially around the hips. So, it kind of, our faith in what was going on was because we had this outstanding team around us. And in fact, here's a story. So in 2006, I was training in Australia. We still didn't have a great team down there at the time, and I was working with physiotherapists and other people, and I had this a nerve impingement in my hip, to the point if I took 2 steps running, it was like excruciating pain. Those nerve pinches where you're just like, ah. And so, it got so bad, went and did MRIs and everything, and they said, oh, Greg, you got arthritic hips. You got arthritic hips. I was like, shit, I was 34. Sorry, I shouldn't swear on your show, but I was 34 at the time. And I just remember feeling really down. And anyway, talked to Alex at the time, said, Greg, get back to Florida and let me work on you. And so for a month, every single day, I would go down and I waited at Alex's office, and he'd see me in between patients again, or he'd see me at lunch or whatever. And we just slowly worked on what were we working on? L5S1, and for triathletes, that's any chiropractor listening, if you're working with triathletes, L5S1, and that psoas and those hip flexors get mega tight. So anyway, that's what happened to me. He loosened me up, and 12 weeks later, I was winning the New York Triathlon, and that was the start of kind of a winning spree of winning. I think I went 4 years where I won, 17 of 19 races. And it all started, I was about to retire in 2006, living in Australia. And then Alex got me back going again.
Thanks, Alex.
And it really was. It was like, I truly do. I owe him my career. And, it's when you find the right person that understands the sport that you're doing and the activity that you're doing, that understands your body. He often called me the bumblebee because he couldn't figure out how I could do what I could do, but, it was, I can't thank both Alex and Ted enough, honestly.
It's so incredibly important when you don't ignore your body. And the one thing that I want our listeners to always be aware of is that thing that nags at you that says, "Oh, it's just going to go away." Don't listen to that, because it often is an impetus. It's like, there's a fire going on in the house, the alarm's going off, and now you're taking the batteries out of the the smoke alarm. That doesn't help you. It starts to add up. And I think, Greg, if I heard you correctly, what I heard as a physician, as a chiropractor, listening to you, is that hip injury was almost like a blessing, because he got deeper into some of the rooted issues.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden your body said, you know what? I am so much better. That there's scar tissue that's been removed. There's mechanics that have been improved. And I'm now optimizing my balance, my stability, my mobility. And now I'm a winner, and I'm winning, winning, winning. I can't quit. I'm a winner. So
it's amazing.
I love that. Yeah. I love knowing that people take control of even the things that are small, that may not today seem like a big deal, but after, impact. If you're a triathlete or an athlete, or just, a mother trying to take care of her young children, is the little things start to add up, and the self-care becomes really, really important in your awareness as the starting point.
I couldn't agree more. And I think we learned a lot from that as well, that we were able to take with us, that we knew that was an area that I became a fairly psoas dominant type athlete, that was an area that we needed to really make sure we focus on. If my psoas and quads got too tight, then I'd have Achilles and plantar fascia issues. So rather than looking at the acute sort of the symptoms, if you like, of an Achilles and just attacking that, we knew that the cause was up higher, and that's the way my body worked. Now everybody's different, so I'm not preaching that that's how you have to approach it for every triathlete, but I have worked with a number of triathletes that will complain about their Achilles, and I say, well, look, why don't you just lie on the side of a bed, pull one knee up to your hip, up to your chest, and let the other leg hang, and just let the hip flexors open up, and and just see how your Achilles feels after that. And it is something that, and I'm not telling people how to do their job, but it is something when it comes to triathletes, it does tend to help people with Achilles injuries if you can open up that front end of the hips.
It's hard to get people to recognize, especially when they're having knee pain. And in my reflections going backwards, is I had a Boston Marathon runner, and she was ready for her PR, her personal record, and the knee pain was excruciating. She came in to see me. It was two visits. I said, "It's not knee pain. It's actually coming from your hip." And I don't know, that's not possible. I feel it in my knee. I'm like, just trust.
Just give me a second.
Trust it,
exactly.
and go with it. And the smile on her face on that second visit was just amazing. And it's becoming aware of your body. And Greg, I think you've become so highly tuned into what the body needs, and building the array of services for that body and the mechanics of how to maximize it. What would you give our audience, knowing what we've talked about today and thinking about them from a variation of, professional athletes to the mother that is caring for 3 young children? What would you give them in terms of improving their overall training, whether it's mental or physical? What things would you tell them to focus on now that you've been through what you've had 27 years of amazing experiences?
Yeah, I think I think everything we've kind of spoken about, but if I was to summarize them, I think one, starting every day with a gratitude practice. For me, that's, I start with one, I thank for the basics. So that's often, my house and my water and having food in the fridge, and then my health. And I'm grateful for those things. And it doesn't mean I don't have a cold and all those things, but in my general health is generally pretty good. My brain, my ability to have conversation with others, my personality, whatever that means. And then I go to family, and I always, I go to Laura and my kids, and then, my mom and brothers and my in-laws and everybody else. And I mention them by name, and I'm very clear about who I'm being grateful for and often why. And then I finish with my work, and I go through the team, and how grateful I am to be surrounded by these amazing people, and finish with things like my podcast grateful for the guests coming on and sharing conversations. You and I were talking pre-show how just wonderful it is to just have an adult conversation once a week. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. So I think number one, I think if you can get into the rhythm of finding just 5 to 10 minutes in the morning and just taking a breath and being grateful. Number two, I think would be being aware of what you're thinking. Practice being aware of what you're thinking, and to repeat that quote, what you think has a direct impact on your physiology, and just taking, like I think you said, taking a breath and just being aware. What am I thinking right now, and what impact is that having on me? So I think that would be my second one, and then probably third, I think would be making sure you're doing something that you're passionate about. I think we do things that we think others think we should be doing. And don't get me wrong, if you're a mother of three, you have to be passionate. So you go, hang in there, it'll get better. But I think, if you decide you want to be an athlete, or if you want to work do you truly, truly love it? Because life is going to kick you. It's going to be brutal, and you need to have enough passion to get you through the hard times. It's easy to have passion when things are going well. But I'm the kind of person that my passion to want to be the best in the world in sport was just so massive that I wasn't going to let things, bury me. And it's the same with me now in the corporate space. It's my passion to build something that's just absolutely incredible and that the world's going to love. It's there, and I'm not going to tire, because then that passion then flows into consistency of effort over time, which is what you're going to need to have if you're going to be successful. So they're my three, I think: gratitude, awareness, and passion.
Well, speaking of gratitude, I cannot thank you enough. As a world champion, as someone who has really maximized life and the spice of life and how to keep their body moving, you also appreciate just the gifts that you've been given. And I am so very grateful that we could share that with our Adjusted Reality podcast audience today, because it is in these moments where we reflect on our own self-worth, our passion, and our body. What does my health feel like? How do I build on it? And you've given them some extremely important tools today. So, Greg, I want to sincerely thank you for all that you brought to Adjusted Reality, and to the listeners out there that he does have his own podcast, the Greg Bennett Show. So there's always that positive influence that you can go to and build upon. So thank you so very much for joining me today.
Oh, it's been such a privilege. Thank you so much, Sherry. And thank you, everybody, for listening. I really appreciate you for hanging in there for the full hour.
I want to thank you for tuning in to Adjusted Reality as we spoke to Greg Bennett about his 27-year career as a professional athlete, and how his mental and physical training played a vital role, and some great opportunities for you as well to improve your daily routine. When you wake up in the morning, are you grateful? And he ran through some of the things he was grateful for, taking time just to look at your life and finding all the blessings that have been part of your past and what you want to bring into your present and then build on in the future. He also, speaking of future, he was aware of where he was, and he knew that there was one very important piece to him being a massively successful athlete, and that was building a team that mattered. And when you're there today, I want you to think about, what is your team full of? Do you have a healthcare team that is ready and willing to support you to optimize your health? And when you look at where you are today, where do you want to be in the future? I like the meditation in the forest, but some of you will like to really have meditation in the way that works for you. Finding passion in your life. What makes you feel fully turned on? The light bulb is bright, you're moving through it, and you enjoy it. When you find your passion, that's your go-to. Go to that when the days are hard or the moments are even harder. Find the things that make you embrace a smile on your face and a giddy up in your step. I think it's grateful, aware, and passionate that Greg brought to our podcast today. Now, this podcast was brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress. As a special gift for listening today, you can visit f4cp.org f4cp.org/health, and you can get a copy of our Mind, Body, Spirit ebook, which focuses on ways you can maximize your health and the ones you love without the use of drugs or surgery. Please don't forget to subscribe, share this podcast with family and friends, rate and review. You never know who you're going to reach when you share a podcast. It's easy, it's simple, and it can change a life today. If you're feeling inspired to learn more about chiropractic, or you'd like to find a doctor of chiropractic near you, or maybe a loved one that needs a little bit of teamwork in their life, having someone to work on their body, please visit f4cp.org/find a doctor. We appreciate your support and look forward to checking in with you again soon on Adjusted Reality.